gave everyone a chance to join us. So thanks for your patience here. So maybe another 2 minutes before we start officially. So I see the number is increasing, maybe another 2 minutes or so. So I think we should start now. So good afternoon and good morning, and a very warm welcome to today's webinar on the knowledge synthesis grants competition envisioning governance systems that work. Please note the webinar's focus is on stream 2. And thank you very much for taking the time to join us. My name is Mentimeter Kamal, a Senior Manager for International Partnerships at the Economic and Social Research Council, ESRC, which is a part of UK Research and Innovation. And we are the largest organization for funding research in economic and social issues. I'm joined by my 2 ESRC colleagues, Sylvia and Holly, who are managing the Q&A session and monitoring the chat. I'm now handing over to my colleagues, Sebastian and Stephen, for their introductory parts. Thank you.
Thanks, Manisha, and good morning, good afternoon to everybody, and thanks for taking the time to join us. My name is Sebastian Laurent Powers. I'm a Senior Manager within the international team within the Arts and Humanities Research Council. AHRC is also a part of UK Research and Innovation, and we are the largest provider of researcher-led and funder-led strategic funding, advanced skills training and career development across the whole range of the arts and humanities in the UK. Now I'll pass over to Stephen now from SSHRC.
Thanks so much, Sebastian. So hello, everyone, and good afternoon. My name is Stephen Brown, and I'm the Senior Program Officer at the Future Challenges Division at SSHRC. So for those of you who don't know, SSHRC is the Social Science and Humanities Research Council of Canada, and we've been hosting the knowledge synthesis grants for about a decade now. So happy to be here.
Thank you very much, Stephen. We're going to talk you through the Envisioning Governance Systems That Work Knowledge Synthesis Grant today. The webinar will really focus on Stream 2, which is the UK and Canada part. There is a specific Canada-only part as well, which is Stream 1. Mostly the recommendations and requirements are the same, but with Stream 2, we do need at least 1 Canadian research lead and 1 UK research lead as well. The kind of overarching objective of today's webinar is just to give a bit of a background to what a knowledge synthesis grant is, for those of you that have not come across it before, a bit of background on what they can be used for, what they can't be used for. And then we're also going to go through the specifics for this particular knowledge synthesis grant call, dates, timings, funding levels, and things like that. There'll also be a time for some questions and answer sessions too. We'll then have a short break, and we'll then go into a session with some of our previous award holders from the trade KSG, which was an ESRC and SSHRC combined call back in 2018. And they'll provide some kind of information on how useful they found the KSG, what they used it for, and what's come out of the research that they did with that funding. Before we get started, we've got a bit of an interactive element. So we're going to be using Mentimeter. Some of you may have used this in the past, and this is essentially to have a look at what the demographics are within this audience. So to give you as the audience an idea of who else is here today listening to this webinar. And we'll also be trying to get a bit of information on your level of knowledge for what a knowledge synthesis grant is, and so on and so forth. So we'll be doing this at the beginning, and then we'll have fewer questions at the end, just for a bit of feedback for ourselves, really, to see if we've managed to hit the mark with this webinar, if it met your expectations, and to understand if your knowledge of what a KSG is and isn't has been improved. So I'm going to go ahead and start sharing the Mentimeter poll. Go ahead, Manisha.
Sorry, Sebastian. Can I just briefly clarify a few points around housekeeping? So before you start with the Mentimeter poll, so just to let you know that this webinar is recorded, and we will share the recording on UKRI's website and SSHRC's website. The slides of today's webinar will be shared afterwards. As I said, my colleague Sylvia and Holly are managing the Q&A session in the chat, and I encourage you to put any questions, any burning questions you might have using the Q&A function. Yeah, as Sebastian already pointed out, we are very delighted to welcome two external speakers, Dr. Deborah D. Lange from the Toronto Metropolitan University and Dr. Paul Sheeran from the University of Manchester, to talk about their experience in managing a successful KSG, and to provide some useful tips and recommendations to you. So thanks, Sebastian. Over to you.
Thanks, Manisha. So I'll just get up the Mentimeter here. Now, for those of you who have used this before, simply go to menti.com and then enter the code that you can see there on the top of your screen. So that's menti.com. You can join from a laptop, from a phone, from a tablet, whatever you feel like. And then enter the code 945615, and you should come up with this presentation where you can start entering results. And I can see some of you are already connected, and I've got some results already coming in, so that's great. Now we'll go through these. We won't spend too much time on this. We'll go through a couple of slides. Some of the questions are kind of multiple choice. Some of them are more open-ended, so you can provide us with some kind of more in-depth text results. And we can go through those. And obviously, based on your results, we might change a bit of the emphasis of what we're talking about today if we see that there are any specific areas that are highlighted in some of those more open questions. So we're up to about 20 responses at the moment. I think we've got a few more people than that on the call. So if you, again, just join at menti.com and then enter the code 9456145. I'll just give a few more seconds on this slide. If you join late, or if you're still entering the code, it does remain at the top throughout the entire presentation, and it will take you automatically to the slide that we're on. Okay. So I think we're getting a pretty good snapshot here of who is in the audience today. Quite a few colleagues from Canadian institutions and a few from UK institutions as well. I'll see if we can get up above the 30 mark, and then once we've done that, I'll move on to the next slide. I think we're going to be hot. Oh, there we go, 30. Perfect. So I'll move on to the next question. So on a scale of 1 to 5, what is your level of knowledge on what a KSG is? We're going with 5 being kind of full knowledge, you feel really confident, 1, no knowledge at all, 3, you kind of understand what they are, but could do with a bit more information, and then obviously 2 and 4 are between that. This gives us a bit of an idea of how many people may have looked with KSGs before, how much you understand, maybe if you've read the landing pages on either our websites or the SSHRC website. And again, once we hit around 30, I'll move on to the next slide. Okay. Right, let's move on to the next slide. So those of you based in Canada, have you previously collaborated with any UK organisations? Same question for those of you based in the UK. Have you ever collaborated with with Canadian organisations? So we're looking like quite a lot of you haven't collaborated with organisations in each other's countries at the moment. A few of you that have. We're getting up towards that 30 number again, so I'll move on. But this is actually really interesting for us to see, just so we can understand kind of who's in the audience and what level of interaction there might already be, and what level of networks may already exist to apply to this opportunity and any others that may come up. Okay, 30 responses. We'll move on. So for those of you that have applied to funding opportunities, have you ever previously applied to a knowledge synthesis grant opportunity? And we're rapidly getting the no's. Okay, fantastic. So this again is really helpful for us to know the kind of the audience that we're reaching with this webinar, and this is kind of exactly the kind of people that we're hoping to reach. For those of you that are interested but don't particularly know what a KSG is or haven't applied for one before, and hopefully this webinar will be very useful for you. So are you planning to apply for this KSG? Now we've got an answer here that says I have colleagues who are interested. I know a few of you that are signed up are maybe not research staff yourselves, but are from research offices within institutions. So we've added that option in there for you, as you may not be applying for it yourself, but you've got colleagues who are interested. Yeah. Thanks for your responses on this. This is good to see that nobody's selected no yet, which is helpful. Okay, we're getting up towards the 30 responses mark, so I will move on to the next slide. So do you already have a potential collaborator in mind for this? As we mentioned at the beginning, for this particular KSG opportunity, you will need one colleague from Canada, one colleague from the UK to make this application. And we added this question in here really because this year we're trialing a bit of a new tool, shall we say. It's where we're trying to do a bit of matchmaking. So for those of you that have said no, you might be interested, and we'll circulate the link to this at the end of the webinar alongside the slides that we'll send round. We have essentially a form that you can fill in that says, this is what I want to look at in terms of my research areas. This is who I am. This is what I do. This is what I would like from a research partner, either in Canada or the UK. And we can have a look at that list and then share those details around and hopefully try and make some of those connections. So for those of you that don't have a collaborator in mind, for those of you that do have a collaborator in mind and might want to expand your networks, that's something that we're looking at offering this year. So we'll send the link around with the recordings and the slides at the end of the webinar. Okay. So this is one of our open-ended questions. So what are you looking to achieve with KSG funding? So I imagine for those of you that are looking to apply to this funding opportunity, you might have had a look at the thematic areas or the overarching rationale for the opportunity, and you might have an idea of what you would like to achieve with that funding. So really looking for some interesting answers here as to what you would like to achieve with this particular funding. It's also fine if you've not got any ideas yet. The call is open until December, so feel free to add anything in there or just to say that you don't quite have your ideas yet. Great, we're starting to see some things coming through. People looking for relationships with Canadian universities, larger collaborations in the future. See other people kind of seconding that as well, looking at seeding funding for longer term, larger scale collaborations, establishing broader research collaborations, using this as a base for doing that. Maybe looking to change your research direction and bringing people in there. Just going to leave this slide open a little longer as it takes a bit more time to type out some responses, but we'll just give it a few more seconds.
But it's very interesting to see what has been already shared. So.
And Mentimeter has this handy tool that will categorize things into various different groupings. So research collaboration, knowledge synthesis, collaborative research, interdisciplinary research is good. And that's something that we're keen to foster within this particular call. Obviously, we've got arts and humanities, and we've got the economic and social sciences. So proposals that look at both of those are of particular interest. All right. Well, thank you very much for your responses here. In the interest of time, I'll move on to our next slide. So what are you hoping to gain from today's webinar? What are you hoping to learn from us? And we can take this into consideration as we move through the next steps in today's webinar, moving through that agenda, both from the very basics of what is a KSG, what isn't a knowledge synthesis grant, as well as the particular opportunity on the envisioning governance systems that work opportunity. Yeah, information on particular grants, timescales, expectations and requirements, whether or not it actually fits the kind of research that you want to do or what you've got in mind. Learn what a successful KSG looks like. I see there's a few of those coming through. Hopefully the presentation later by some of our existing award holders will help to clarify that and give you a bit of a better idea of what they used it for. Eligibility, okay. What ESRC and SSHRC want to achieve. We'll certainly go through how this links into some of our other investments and some of our broader strategies a bit later on. Bit of clarity on maybe some of the language that's being used in the call text or the opportunity text itself. And these are all really interesting to us, and we can make sure that we cover these points as we're going through. And certainly feel free to raise more specific questions in the question and answer session a little later on. I'm going to stop sharing here. This is the last question that I had for the beginning of the session. I will leave it open, so in the background you can continue to enter responses to this question, but I'll hand back over to Manisha for the next part.
Thank you, Sebastian. Just to emphasize that, because I saw that someone is asking how this person can participate in the questionnaire. So please go to Menti.com and enter code 94566145. And if you have any specific questions related to that, put that, please feel free to put that in the Q&A function box, and we can take that. We can look at that later. So, sorry, I do struggle to share my screen because I've got only one screen here. Sebastian, is it possible for you to put that in the presentation mode? Somehow I tried, but it's not working. So sorry for that. So what I am covering is basically quite the basic part around the question, what is actually a KSG, knowledge synthesis grant, and what is not a KSG. And then I'm also providing some information about the previous competition so that you get a sense what to expect. So in terms of the key question, what is a knowledge synthesis grant, a KSG? So please note that this is made of two key components. So one relates to writing and producing a knowledge synthesis report and an evidence brief. So you may raise the question, why this requirement? So our aim is, please go to the next slide. Our aim is to, first of all, to support the use of evidence and decision-making, to support the application of best practices, and also to contribute to developing future research agendas. And I think particularly in relation to this point, future research agendas, that was also something which a few participants raised during the Mentimeter poll, why they are planning to apply for the KSG. Next slide, please. So in order to be able to classify a project as a KSG, it needs to fulfill the following criteria or objectives. So first of all, it needs to critically assess the state of knowledge of the theme under consideration with respect to the proposed research question. So in this, in relation to this current KSG, it is about governance. Secondly, it needs to identify knowledge strengths and gaps within the proposed theme. Thirdly, it needs to assess the quality, rigor, and accuracy of the current work in the field. And finally, it needs to use effective knowledge mobilization methods to engage with and to facilitate the sharing of findings with cross-sectoral stakeholders. And with cross-sectoral stakeholders, we mean not only the academic sector, but also the public, private, and non-for-profit sectors. Next slide, please. So to sum up, what you need, the key takeaway is basically a KSG aims to support the synthesis of existing research knowledge and identify knowledge gaps by focusing on the state of research produced over the past 10 years. Next slide, please. And what is not a knowledge synthesis grant? So please note that a KSG is not an original contribution to knowledge. So it's not contributing or supporting the production of original research, which basically directly relates to the fact that we are looking at the synthesis of existing research knowledge in order to be able to identify knowledge gaps. Next slide, please. The current KSG on envisioning governance system that work is not the first one. So SSHRC, together with ESRC, launched a KSG on understanding the future of Canada-UK trade relationships in January 2018, with the aim to assess the state of research knowledge on Canada-UK relationship in a post-Brexit context. 10 projects were funded in May 2018, and our 2 external speakers today were successful to secure funding under this trade KSG. I included the link to the collection of evidence brief, which basically highlighting some of the research findings from the KSG holders' final report and their relevance in key policy areas related to future Canada-UK relationships. So I invite you to have a look at the evidence brief and the final synthesis reports using the link here to get a sense how they are put together and how the overall structure look like. The evolving narratives of cultures and histories, KSG was launched last year in September 2023, and the aim was to synthesize from a social science and humanities research perspective, the research related on evolving narratives and cultures and histories. SSHRC partnered with AHRC, and 5 projects were funded under stream 2 of this competition. I believe they started in April-May 2024 this year, and the final form is expected to take place in January 2025 to present the synthesis, the finding of the synthesis reports. So that was basically the first part, to give you a generic overview, what a KSG is, what is not a KSG, and to present some examples from the past KSGs. And now I'm handing over to Sebastian to focus on the current KSG and to explain the key components of the current KSG. And after Sebastian's presentation, we will then open up the Q&A session to raise any questions you might have in relation to the first part. Thank you.
Amazing. And just on that question and answer section, please do feel free to start entering your questions at any time during the webinar. Don't feel like you need to wait until the question and answer session itself. You can use the little Q&A button at the bottom of your screens to start putting those questions in there, some of which we might be able to answer as we're going through, and some of the other ones we'll answer live. So yeah, I'm going to talk about the specifics of the Envisioning Governance Systems that Work Knowledge Synthesis Grant opportunity. So including the background, how it came around, as well as the timelines, thematic areas, what we're looking for, and so on. So this is essentially one of 16 global challenges that was identified through a scoping exercise that took place by our colleagues in SSHRC and some other colleagues within the Canadian research system. And it identified these challenges that are, important to Canadian society, but also have global impact, which is why we're really interested in joining them as well. These aren't isolated challenges. These affect everybody around the world, or at least a good proportion of people around the world. Manisha's already mentioned some of the previous KSGs that came along. This one is the 4th in the current iteration. So, previously there was the dynamics of privilege and marginalization. There was the evolving narratives on cultures and histories called that AHRC took part in. And there was also one on global health and wellness. Why is AHRC and ESRC joining in this particular KSG opportunity? Well, it really aligns very strongly to a lot of what we're doing on a strategic level, both within UKRI and our respective funding councils. So within UKRI, for instance, there's a strategic theme on building a secure and resilient world. And as part of that, there's actually a focus on global order in a time of change. So obviously very related to the questions of governance and trust in governance structures, participation in governance structures, and so on. Within ESRC, this aligns to quite a few of their big questions on polycrisis. So, governance, trust, looking at political instability. It links to quite a few of their existing investments, such as the International Public Policy Observatory, the Economics Observatory, and the Local Policy Innovation Partnership Hub. For an arts and humanities perspective, we have a vision area called Contemporary Challenges, and that's very broad. It spans from things like housing to climate crises to developing AI and the ethics of responsible AI and so on. But it also looks at how structures are shaped by and shape responses to global challenges. So all of these large areas, well, actually, how do they shape our responses to them? How do they form governance structures, and what kind of impact does the form of those governance structures have on responses to crises, and how well they're dealt with, both within the governance structures, but also the communities that are affected by them. So thematically, with this particular KSG, it's on envisioning governance systems. So it's incredibly broad. If you've read any of the landing pages and any of the detail, you'll notice that there are 8 themes that have been highlighted. And these themes have been co-created between SSHRC, ESRC, and AHRC, as well as other colleagues in Canada as well, because Stream 1, the Canadian-only part of this, is also in conjunction, in partnership with other Canadian institutions. So the 8 themes there are really just for guidance and inspiration. So they're there to kind of give you an idea of the kind of things that you can submit. And if you look at the guidance on our landing pages, then you'll notice there are some particular research questions that are underneath all of those. Now, please don't feel constrained by that. That's some guidance. These are not the specific questions we're hoping that you'll look at. They're there to give you a bit of inspiration. But you can, if you feel like your particular research area or proposal has anything to do with governance systems, then please do feel free to put that proposal in, even if it doesn't align to some of these areas. So in terms of those 8 themes, we have involvement and inclusion in governance structures. We have international governance. We're looking at health governance in all of its forms, digital governance and democracy, finance governance, systems of governance, housing and infrastructure governance, and past and future models of governance. So there's a whole broad range. You'll notice some of them are thematic, some of them are a bit more around the systems and the modalities of governance. Now, these we're looking at kind of the international layer of governance. We can also look at national layers of governance, state level or devolved level administration, local council administration levels. So really all the different kind of levels and types of governance. So don't feel like you need to be constrained within this. When you're doing a Stream 2 application, because you need to have an AHRC related or ESRC related UK lead, as well as a Canadian lead, the majority of the UK component of this research must fall within either ESRC or AHRC's remit. And we can offer some guidance on that. We've got an email address that you can email if you've got any questions, as do colleagues at SSHRC, and we will share that along with the slides at the end of this. So if you have any questions as to whether or not your particular research area is eligible for a KSG, does it fall within the broader themes here, or does it fall within the remit that it needs to, we're on hand to answer those questions. Moving on to funding, outcomes, and the future. So these are the important dates. The opportunity has been open since kind of late May. It closes in December, on the 12th of December. So hopefully, for those of you that might not have research partners, that still gives you a bit of time to look and find some and build those collaborations and put a proposal in. Now, this maximum award figure is the award figure for each of the countries. So in total, the total award figure cannot exceed 30,000 Canadian dollars, and it needs to be a 60-40 split maximum. You can do 50-50 split if you want. You can do any other type of split between Canada and the UK, but not more than 60-40 on either side. So 60% of that for the Canadian side would be 18,000 Canadian dollars. 60% on the UK side will be 10,517 pounds. Now, it's worth noting that for the UK researchers, this is the full economic cost figure. AHRC and ESRC will fund projects to 80% of that full economic cost. So we have combined funds available to support 27 projects, which is quite a healthy number. And the duration of these projects is 1 year. So they'll last for, roughly 12 months. You'll see on the right-hand side here when we're talking about outcomes that there are some additional timeframes, and I'll go over those shortly. So if you want to apply to this opportunity, it needs to be done via the SSHRC website. Colleagues in SSHRC are looking after the application process for this. So if you look on the SSHRC landing page, there'll be a link directly to the applications. If you look at the UKRI landing page, you can find this opportunity on our funding finder. Then the link where it says apply now, that will also take you to the SSHRC website. Important to note here that whilst we do need 1 Canadian and 1 UK researcher for this, and they should be equal, both co-leads of the project, only the Canadian researcher can actually submit an application on the SSHRC system. Now, once that's done, you can also download a PDF of the application and then ask the UK leads to fill in that information. But then that does then need to be uploaded again by the Canadian lead researcher. So in terms of assessment, there will be a joint Canada-UK panel that's held for this opportunity. And the evaluation criteria are set out within the call and opportunity text that you'll find on our separate landing pages. So what are we looking for from this opportunity? Well, as Manisha mentioned at the beginning, you'll need to provide a synthesis report. And this is maximum of 40 pages. And really, this is kind of the main report that outlines what the landscape in your particular area looks like. So if you've got a particular research question, what is the state of knowledge there? Where are the gaps that you might see that are useful for future funding that you would like to direct that at? And you'll also need to provide a 2-page evidence brief. Now, these evidence briefs are really about, once you've done that kind of looking for the different areas of knowledge, once you understand what the state of knowledge is, what can we use at the moment? What is of immediate impact? If there are any particular policy recommendations in there that you can see, then these need to go within this evidence brief, and that can be used to take forwards to, be shown in this knowledge mobilization workshop, and to help actually have some immediate impact out of these projects, as well as identifying those future research areas. So there is a requirement for those to be in the public domain. So bear in mind when you're writing them that they will be published and they will be accessible to anybody that wants to read them. There will be a kickoff workshop in May, possibly. The dates are still to be decided, but we'll be working out with colleagues in SSHRC to find that. And at these kickoff workshops, essentially all of the project teams, successful project teams, will come together to share their research ideas, what they're working on and what they hope to get out of things. And then a few months down the line, just before the end of the projects, there will be a knowledge mobilization workshop, currently tentatively scheduled for January 2026. And this is where you'll be able to kind of share your findings, your potential policy interventions with a broad range of stakeholders. So I think that is the end of my part of the presentation. So we hope it's been useful thus far, but I think we're moving now into the question and answer session. So we're happy to take your questions. If you haven't added things in there already, please feel free to put your questions in now.
Hi, Seb. I do have a question to start though, if you're ready. So we have one question. Is sustainability off the table this time around, for example, intersection of environmental and digital policy?
Thanks, Holly. I mean, certainly from my perspective, if you can make a link between that and governance structures, then absolutely. There's nothing to say that sustainability as a topic in itself cannot be used or cannot be put in there. The real crux of it is that link into governance structures or participation within governance areas. So yeah, thematically, it might not appear in that list, but actually, if there's a strong link to governance structures, either the structures themselves or people's participation within them, and how maybe that affects sustainability, then that's absolutely fine. Yeah. And if anybody else wants to come in on that question.
Yeah, I just want to confirm that this is basically a kind of red thread. So it is sustainability is because it is so important, so crucial, particularly in relation to thinking about effective governance systems for the future, that this basically sustainability underpins all the proposed themes and key research questions, even though it is in a way a bit hidden, but it is still quite relevant and important. So it's not just to give a pretty straightforward answer to the question raised. It is not off table. So it is important.
Perfect, thank you though. And we have a few questions just to clarify around the funding. The first one being, please can you clarify the maximum amount of the award?
Thanks, Holly. I saw that question come in. So yes, the maximum amount is 30,000 Canadian dollars. You're correct. That needs to be split between the UK side and the Canadian side. So the maximum amount of funding for the UK side is just over £10,000 if you're doing a 60-40 split. And for the Canadian side, it would be £18,000 Canadian dollars if you're having 60% of the funding provided by SSHRC. And this will be something for you to decide in your project teams as to where that balance lies. You're also more than welcome to do a 50-50 split. But yes, the overall amount combined UK Canadian is 30,000 Canadian dollars or equivalent in pounds.
Thank you. Could we also check as well what the money can be spent on, and can it be spent on salaries with the amount available?
Stephen, I don't know if you want to take this one. You can maybe provide some examples of what previous KSG award holders have used their funds for.
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms of eligible use of funds, there are some differences, of course, from Canadian researchers and UK researchers, but typically speaking, it's to fund students. If there are some conferences you would like to attend, as well as any other matters in terms of collaboration amongst teams. But typically speaking, the crux of it is often student training.
Thanks, Stephen. We can also hold that question for our colleagues who will be giving a presentation later and ask them, what they use their funding for. So if we keep that in the back of our minds, we can move that question there. But yes, things like travel or conferences and so on and so forth.
Cool. Do we have time for one last question? So if AHRC and ESRC funds 80% of full economic costs, what are the eligible sources of funding for the remaining 10%?
So this is a good question. And so this is really comes down to UKRI kind of funding rules. So typically UKRI, any of the councils within UKRI, including AHRC and ESRC, will fund things at 80% of the full economic cost. And that's just standard across the board with the vast majority of our grants. It is expected within the UK research system that additional 20% will come from the research organisation that you currently work at. So it will be provided out of their research budget, and we provide obviously the vast majority of the funding, and the host institution that you work at will provide the 20% remaining.
Just to add on that, so basically the key point around why it's required to be eligible to receive funding, I think it would be really useful for you, if you're interested to submit an application, to familiarize yourself with the eligibility requirements, because that, as my colleague Sebastian pointed out, 80% funding is coming from ESRC/AHRC, and the remaining one are coming from the institutions for which you're working, and you need to be eligible to receive the funding.
Perfect. Thank you both.
I believe we have got Karen Melton who raised their hand. Don't know how it might work. Holly, Sylvia, I don't know. Is it possible to?
I can, yeah.
Oh, sorry, it was a mistake. Sorry, it says it was a mistake, so ignore that.
I think Judo had a raised hand as well. Was that a mistake, or was that? If not, I can allow.
Yeah, we can allow allow Huda to ask their question. I think I see it in the chat, but yes, we can hear it live.
Hi, can you hear me? Hi, everyone.
Yeah, we
can hear you.
Thank you very much for the information, really very helpful. Just two questions I have. When you said that 80% will be funded by the UKRI as at the full economic cost, then remaining 20% will be funded by the lead institution only, which is Canadian University, because they will be submitting, or it will be shared between the UK and Canadian universities, or that both have to contribute 20% each. So can you clarify on that, please?
Yes, thanks for your question, Huda. So the UK institution only will pay that. That's a UK requirement for all of our funding, that 80% of it is paid by us as the research funders, and 20% is paid for by the UK institution. So imagine, you had £10,000 funding for the UK side, then we would provide, £8,000 worth of that, and the UK university or institution would pay for the other £2,000 of that. Stephen, this might be a good time to go over the funding rules for the Canadian institutions.
Yes, certainly. Thank you, Sebastian. So for the Canadian institutions, the full budget that you will submit will be funded at 100% from SSHRC. So there's no requirement from the Canadian institutions for the SSHRC portion of the budget.
Thank you very much. And one more question, that is there any preference for a methodology? For example, someone else also asked about the systematic review.
Certainly not from our side. I would say this will be judged by a panel of researchers from Canada, the UK. There may be different approaches within both of those countries, within their respective research communities, but everything will be kind of judged equally, shall we say. So the panelists may have specific interests or preferences for certain methodologies. We don't know what they are, and we as funders are not going to be imposing that on this opportunity. If anybody else wants to come in on that question, I'm happy to.
I'll just jump in quickly. One of the best ways is to look at the evaluation criteria that is on both the UKRI and SSHRC website. And that is the exact criteria that all of the merit reviewers will be instructed to provide their scores.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
I think there's a very interesting question about the difference between a knowledge synthesis report versus systematic literature review. So I'm happy to take that as a kind of starting point. So, of course, in order to be able to produce and write a knowledge synthesis report, it somehow requires that you do a systematic and thorough literature review in order to be able to identify the existing knowledge gaps. But I suppose it would be really helpful, as I said, to look at the previous knowledge synthesis reports related to the previous competitions. But I suppose it is a mixture of presenting the proposed research question, connect that with the thorough analysis of the existing research gaps, and not only gaps, but also referring to their strength, and connect that with the knowledge mobilization part. So I think even though the literature review is a kind of precondition, but the synthesis report is more than that. I'm conscious of the time, just to keep that briefly, but happy to invite Stephen to add any additional points he might have in relation to that.
Yeah, nothing really to add, Manija. It's mainly that the literature review is part of that knowledge gap, and it's really the focus on finding the areas that have not been researched to date, and kind of plugging that gap through a literature review, as well as other synthesis work.
Thank you. And I believe there was another question about sustainability, and Sam is suggesting that our proposal will focus on best practice governance for providing support to SMEs to decarbonize. And I think, oops, there are some background noises, which is a bit irritating. Anyway, so I think that relates probably to the question how to deal with the proposed themes and questions. And I, as my colleague Sebastian already pointed out, please treat those thematic areas and the questions as a kind of guidance. And you're more than welcome to propose themes, questions, which of course has a strong connection to the theme of the competition, but which is not listed. So to go back to Sam's question, it is definitely possible and feasible to include that and frame that around sustainability. But as I said, it's really important to make sure that you see the proposed themes as a guidance and not as a kind of compulsory or compulsory list to include. So I think we have got now 1 minute left for any additional questions before we make a very short take a very short comfort break and start with the second part of the webinar. And I see that Dr. Deborah de Lange already joined us, which is very good. So Holly, is there anything else we need to?
Yeah, so there's a couple of questions that just come up in the Q&A box. So the first one, proposed knowledge mobilization activities need to extend beyond the 40-page report and the 2-page evidence brief.
Not quite sure whether I got that. So do they suggesting that they want to extend that beyond the proposed 40-page?
I think so. It was submitted anonymously, so unless the person submitted it, we'd like to put up a follow-up. Or I've got another question, which is, can podcasts be funded to disseminate the briefing report so it gets out into the world?
I think with regard to the first question, I believe, again, Stephen, please jump in if I missed something here. But I think the maximum page limit is 40, and the expectation is to have a 2-page long evidence brief, and it should, and those requirements needs to be taken into consideration, and that is quite sit, and the flexibility to change that and submit more than 40 pages or to submit more than 2 pages is probably quite limited. But Stephen, would you mind to confirm?
Absolutely. And so we do provide guidelines to all of the grant recipients, especially during the kickoff webinar in May. And so we do provide guidelines exactly in terms of how to format the evidence brief as well as the final report. But as Mani just said, it's about 2 pages for the evidence briefs, and you can see those on SSHRC's website as well to see previous evidence briefs, and 40 pages for the final report.
Great. So as I said, we are happy to take some of the questions and answers where, because of the time limitation now, offline, and send and share answers in relation to them. And now I'm very sorry, but we need to keep our time quite on keep an eye on that. And I'm proposing that we take a very, very short comfort break and reconvene sharp 3 p.m. UK time with our second part. So see you all in a bit. Let me just thank yourself. To the second part of the webinar, and we are delighted to be joined by Dr. Deborah Lange from the Toronto Metropolitan University and by Dr. Paul Sheeran from University of Manchester. So thank you so much to both of you for taking the time to join us and to speak about your experience managing a successful KSG in 2018 and 2019. So I'm just handing over to you, and the floor is yours.
Oh, well, it's lovely to be here. Hi, Paul. How are you? Nice to see you or hear from you after a while. Paul? Okay. Well, anyway, I'm going to go ahead. So what I understood was that I was supposed to talk a little bit about some of the challenges and of working on a KSG, especially across the ocean, and how we addressed some of those challenges and how we became successful. Is that correct, Manija? Is that what you wanted to hear about?
Yeah, that's correct. And feel free to add any additional points. So we are, I think for the audience, it would be really interesting to hear how you basically secure the success, how you build your partnership, what kind of impact it had, in what kind of challenges you encountered. And then, of course, they are probably quite interested to see some tips and recommendations as well, if possible.
Okay. Yeah, and I guess there'll be tips along the way as I discuss this. But if Paul wants to step in, I'm happy to go back and forth with Paul in terms of talking. I just didn't hear him except for earlier. So anyway, I'll just start with a few points, and then when Paul is not muted anymore, he could probably make.
I'm back on now, I think.
Hi, Paul. Okay, good to hear. Okay, so at any rate, I don't, in terms of securing the KSG, today makes things quite clear. So I didn't find that securing the KSG was, you know, where challenges arose. You know, I came up with an original idea, and I talked to my colleague, Phil Walsh at my university, and he knew, you know, Paul. So that, you know, it was my colleague who had the connection with Paul because he's been working across, you know, the pond. And so, you know, finding people to work with wasn't too hard, and because we have the British connections, and I had an original idea, and I understand, you know, the KSG is just supposed to review existing research, but you have to do that before you develop new ideas anyway. And so I had a new idea, and I knew that it needed a full, you know, literature search. So this grant was a great opportunity to do that. And for me, it was a nice thing that, you know, I'd work with someone in another country, especially one that is leading on circular economy. So we know the UK leads on circular economy, and I thought of putting international trade together with circular economy to develop this concept of circular economy international trade. And so we were looking through literature to see where, if that had been discussed at all, or, you know, how the two literatures, circular economy and international trade, because I have a background in international trade as well as sustainable development, how they were discussed, even if they were in the same, you know, journal articles or in international organization documents and that kind of thing. So it was a pleasure for me to work with Paul, because he comes from a country that really leads on circular economy, and that would also help to validate the search, right? Because he and his team would do his independent search, and Phil and I would do our search, and then we put them together, and that would ensure that it was quite thorough. So like I said, I think because I had quite an original idea behind the reason for the search, you know, that probably helped. And it's something that is of interest to both countries, because this was a Canada-UK piece. It was of interest to both countries. Then that's, you know, I can only guess why ours was chosen. That's really up to those who are involved in making those choices. So I don't know about those discussions behind the scenes. So Paul, do you want to make some comments, or do you want me to continue? I have points
I'll
about.
just say something quickly.
Yeah.
I think those
Yeah.
early stages are really important, you know, just kind of finding out what's in, what's out. And I think it was very transparent on what both sides were contributing and suggesting. You know, I thought that was very constructive that we, you know, through, you know, setting up Zoom meetings and also sharing, you know, ideas on Google Docs. I think quickly we were able to establish, you know, what was the scope of the project, and, you know, and based around your ideas. And I thought that went very smoothly, actually. We didn't necessarily have any problems at that stage.
Yeah, that's great to hear.
Yep.
And yeah. So should we talk next about the actual process of working on it then? Because I've kind of addressed the points about securing it, as Menitmeter had suggested. So okay, so well, I mean, even though, you know, you could see us all talking on Zoom right now, and, you know, it seems like, what can't you do on Zoom? I think that we went through a pandemic, and we learned very well how to coordinate on Zoom. I started teaching university classes on Zoom. But when you're working on a fairly big project, it becomes less easy to coordinate, you know, from a distance, especially when you don't know the resources of the other university. So, for example, I don't know the resources that Paul has from his university, and I don't know the policies of his university for doing research, right? Because we all have to do those, you know, the ethics board checks and all that kind of thing in all universities, but we have different specific policies and processes. And so those are things that, you know, Paul couldn't know about our university and we can't know about his. And when you're trying to explain all the possibilities that a university offers, for example, or all the constraints that a university might have on how you move forward, those are long conversations to try to, you know, have when you don't have, neither side has those experiences at either university. And so all, you know, what you have to do is to resolve, you have to be very good communicators. And as Paul said, I think that we, you know, collectively communicated very well, and having regular meetings is a way to do that, because you can't, you wouldn't want to have a meeting where you try to dump all of that on each other. You know, you couldn't do it anyway. And so you kind of have to learn that over time as each side understands what the requirements are, and you have discussions to tease out, you know, what can we do, what can they do, what are the processes and policies at each end. Would you agree, Paul, or how
Yeah,
did
definitely. And I think that point about some of the complexities around our specific institutions and their policies on things like ethics and you know, and obviously other regulatory and compliance issues, it does actually take quite a bit of time. And I think our side had a bit of delays, you know, just navigating through some of the complexities around the university's ethics criteria, but we overcame any problems, and it wasn't an issue, but it did actually take a bit of time to navigate. So I think anybody
exactly.
coming up against that, you know, you're gonna need a bit of time to work through it.
Yeah, exactly. And because we, so what I found that was very helpful about facilitating the process was that we were able, the grant enabled us to meet in person, right? And so I think that as a manager, so I've worked as a manager and in many industries previous to my PhD, and I know Paul has tremendous experience. You know, it's really important to get to know the people who you're working with and develop rapport and have that time, you know, some social time with each other, so that you can develop understandings, because when you are separated, you know, you could potentially have miscommunication, which, you know, our communications went extremely well, but I think that was facilitated by this grant because we had an opportunity to meet, and we had a great time, really nice time in Ottawa, very nice process that was set up, and then also in the UK later when we presented. So I think that those are things to consider if you can build and remember the importance of having those social connections with people who are not at your university and possibly in another country when you're working on a fairly long-term project. Any comments on that, Paul? Do you want to?
No, I just completely support and echo that. You know, it's so important to, you know, get together and, you know, in the social setting, but also, you know, we spend a lot of time even, you know, socially discussing what we were doing and how we were doing it, and what was working, what potentially we could do better, you know. So it was very much a building experience, and obviously the grant facilitated that. So yeah, it worked very well.
And also having the whole team there. So we had research assistants on both sides, and I don't think we got to meet your research assistants, but you had gotten to meet ours because we started in Canada, correct?
That's right. I think Mariana was in Italy. I was the reason why Mariana didn't travel at that particular point. Yeah. But yeah, I think she'd actually finished by the time you visited London. So we'd pretty much completed that, you know, meta-analysis stage.
Yeah. So I think it is nice when the whole team, including, you know, if you have research for the others, if you have research assistants, to include them in every step of the process, because it's also motivating. Again, being a manager, you want people to take ownership of the project that you're working on. And when people feel included, if they can, obviously in this case, she was having a lovely time in Italy. So, in cases where you're managing people and you want them to feel motivated, you want them to take ownership of the project and feel engaged and motivated, especially when it's a longer project, and they have to keep going maybe through times when it seems like this is a lot of work, or this is an effort to make, especially with maybe in the case of research assistants, often younger people. So that's where I would also suggest ensuring that you choose research assistants who have a proven track record of excellence and of delivering, and of the capabilities to do research, or at least a very high level of passion for research, because they have to stick through it. It's not a one-day job, right? And there's a lot of iterations that come up on the work, and so they have to be able to accept feedback and improve where because they are developing, right? That's the typical case where you're developing new people to become researchers. You do have to select carefully, I would say. Any comments you want to add?
No, definitely. Yeah, 100% agree. Yeah, it's a learning process, isn't it? Both for the research students and obviously as supervisors or managers, just making sure that that momentum continues throughout the entire project, because people get obviously distracted or are offered other projects to work on, and everybody's trying to manage time, and that's tricky. So the time management element is really important, not just at the beginning, it's all the way through. That was certainly my experience.
Yeah, it's a sustained effort, and that's what everyone on the team has to understand. And so that's something for everyone here who's going to be potentially involved in one of any big research project, that sustained effort needs people who are enthusiastic, and it's not enthusiasm that's going to die after they realize that there's really actually a lot of work here to do, and that it does need to be sustained. So just finding people who maybe have somewhat of a proven track record, maybe perhaps you've worked with them before, that's advantageous. I think also using project management skills, or at least having people on your team who have project management skills, is an advantage, because and being able to communicate those project management timelines clearly, because you're going to want to set up intermediate goals to reach your final goal. This isn't a project where you can by any means leave everything to the last minute, and everyone also has to know exactly what they're doing, right? And so when they're someone with I'm also previously an engineer, and so I've worked on projects. The project management has to be there so that you figure out what are the intermediate goals to get to the end goal, and then who's working on what, and that needs to be understood but also agreed to. And this is where having the time with each other to develop good working relationships is really important, so that can be communicated, understood, and agreed to, right? Because it's like a like a social contract. When you're working with people, you have there's no hierarchy here in research, right? And that's a difference from being in the corporate world, where there's someone who's overseeing others. That's not the case on research projects. We're all peers ultimately, and so that's a different environment where it is about everyone feeling part of a team, being motivated and interested, and also having the skills to develop, to communicate how things are going to work clearly, so that others are not confused. Right?
And I think it's also maintaining constructive criticism. I think at times, we can get so engrossed in what we're doing that, you know, certainly I think with research assistants, you know, if you do actually have to say, well, perhaps consider something else, is being sensitive to you know, how they're going to take that and being constructive. And I think sometimes as well, you know, pressures when you're trying to complete something, you know, makes those situations challenging sometimes. So I think it's just keeping in mind, you know, it's important to be constructive and continue that, you know, being constructive throughout the project to keep everybody on board. But I think we did really well with that. But I just think we need to have that space where you can, you know, say, actually, I don't think this is working, and it not being you know, a catalyst for difficulties. It should be considered positive, thinking, well, you know, yeah, well, how can we do it better is the
Right.
and keeping everybody on board with that.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is where, you know, hiring the types of research assistants who are going to be able to receive that feedback, right, and understand it, that it is important. I thought that what was really good about our project is that we did do separate independent literature reviews, and this allowed for covering more ground and incorporation of different interpretations and perspectives. I think in the end, we actually covered different literature, but we didn't know that in advance. And that's a good thing, because we could have ended up covering some similar literature, because we're coming, you know, we're all using library databases. But, you know, we all read literature through our own lenses, and we interpret differently sometimes, and that's because we have previous experiences, and so we might put different emphasis on reading, you know, the same articles, and bringing those different perspectives together, whether it's on similar documents or not, or whether it's in, you know, other different sources, is extremely valuable, because you're bringing a richness of views and perspectives to the literature review. And so I really appreciated that, you know, there was another side working on literature reviews, and choosing your own, you know, you were choosing your own sources, and bringing your perspective, the British perspective, and this perspective of the work that you were reading to the table. And in the end, what we wanted to do is a comparison to see, you know, were there really strong differences in opinions? And it turned out, as I remember, that it was quite similar, right, Paul? But there was adding, like we were each adding to each other's work, but there were not conflicts in terms of vastly different perspectives that would have brought difficulties to bringing the work together as one.
Sure. Yeah, definitely. And I think what was interesting, although there was lots of similarities when we came to do the actual interviews a little bit later on with industry and, you know, government organizations, then it was quite interesting how, you know, gaps started to open up, you know. So for example, you know, some of the tensions between some of the academic literature using the circular economy, and then industry, you know, talking about efficiencies and cost management, not talking about circular economy, although actually the principles are relatively similar in terms of what the, you know, both areas are trying to do. But yeah, kind of a different language almost. I thought that was really an interesting part of the research, actually.
Yeah, do you want to talk about some of, I'm not maybe specifically the people, but you know, you found some pretty good people to interview for our project.
Some of the big energy companies, and straight away I talk, is it okay to name that? But anyway, one of the largest blue chip energy companies, you know, in the oil industry. And I saw one of the senior directors there, who was also an engineer, and started talking about the circular economy. He said, well, I'll stop you there. I don't know what you're talking about. What is the circular economy? And the moment I said, well, it's about resource recapture. Oh yeah, well, we do that all the time. It's efficiencies, it's cost management. So straight away, there seemed to be this, you know, assumption that although funny enough, we did send out the, you know, an early draft report to the interviewees. I don't think some of them read it, not all of them. But it was just interesting, that kind of difference of understanding, what the circular economy actually is, and from an academic point of view, but then in a practical sense, how it's often, described as being something completely different. So going back to, the literature research on both sides was quite similar, but I think when we did actually take it out to the and do the interviews, it was quite stark, the differences between, what is the circular economy, is it ideological or political, and then in the context of it being applied by industry is very much about generating efficiencies. I don't necessarily think that's a problem, but I think it's something which is quite interesting in terms of when it comes to policy, both in the context of a kind of a local setting, but when you put it in an international setting, it becomes quite complicated. So, for example, another institution was the Department of International Trade, and I did quite a few meetings there. And what was interesting there straight away, well, it was, was multilateralism, and a lot of the kind of current literature in development economics is a lot of developing countries are critical of the circular economy because of things like, voluntary sustainability regulations, which they see as damaging to the local economy, not necessarily being positive in terms of conserving resources. It's actually denying the use of those resources for export. So it becomes, again, quite different to what you assume to be working when you start to bring in the actual practicalities on the ground in the terms of when you start to apply the circular economy. So I think a lot of that was really interesting, actually, when we did start doing the interviews, finding different elements that, in a sense, create their own research agendas, on their own.
Yeah, and I think we derive some points for learning for the people here from what you've talked about. For example, in terms of interviewing people, and they're busy and they may not want to read and review your entire report, so you might want to identify which part of the report, based on their expertise and their interests, you want to suggest that they read. And I remember Phil Walsh was helpful in that respect of thinking about, how busy other people are, and saying, we need to have others read, like, collectively read the whole report and review everything, but let's parcel it out and say, you, sir or madam, please read this part because this is the part that you'll be interested in. And then I think you'll, like, for these other people here, you'll get them more likely to read it and to pay attention in more depth to that part. And then to Paul's points that he was just making, speaking to a range of stakeholders, right, from having different perspectives, is extremely useful and brings richness to the review process and validation process of the literature reviews. Anything else you want to add to that, Paul?
Yeah, just finally, in terms of making sure you leave yourself time to set up the interviews, I think that was some, I think after we completed it, we started then getting respondents coming back saying, yes, happy to do a meeting or an interview, but obviously it was too late to include it. So yeah, just leaving plenty of time to make sure that your respondents have got time to consider, the request for. I mean, that's something we probably all say to research students anyway, but I think it is something that even, experienced academics should keep in mind, that certainly in industry, people can be working on the other side of the world, etc., and doing different things, and they don't always get back quickly, and that can be an issue.
Yeah, and I mean, they don't have the same incentives that we have, right, in terms of getting a report done, right? So they're not they're coming from a different place, and having aligned incentives is normally understood to be important in management, but in academia, I don't think we're always thinking about. I see that in general on grants and the work we do. We're not always thinking about aligned incentives. and with those who are trying to get help from. And I think it is really important to think about the differing incentives when you're trying to work with people who come from different backgrounds and have different work objectives, right? Okay, so yeah, so I mean, I wanted to make several points, and obvious things like don't start relying on emails, right? I mean, this is something that everyone understands normally, that Zoom meetings are as good as you're going to get when you're far apart in other countries, and telephone calls, right? And so I think this is just a point that everyone probably understands, that emails can be helpful, but really talking is a better approach, and also bringing the team together around those discussions so that everyone can hear what everyone is saying, so that if something does change, everyone is on track, those kinds of things, and having regular meetings and building those regular meetings into your project plan. So remembering the point I made about project management being important. And any other points that you wanted to make, Paul, to add
No,
to?
exactly. I mean, like you say, it's almost having like a mental Gantt chart, an electronic diary in your head. Make sure you've got all those, key milestones, when things need to be done, what needs to happen in the run up to those key milestones, and just make sure that if you're miles behind or you're ahead, you adjust accordingly. I think sometimes with research you can get overwhelmed and forget about or actually you start cutting corners, and I think that can be equally problematical. It's just good time management, and as Debbie says, I think it's really important to have kind of a project management mindset sometimes with particularly with KSG work, I think.
Yeah. Okay. And Menitmeter, we haven't covered now your point that you wanted us to talk about, like positive outcomes, correct? Have we covered what you wanted to hear about from us?
Yes, absolutely. So I'm just conscious of the time. If you can give us some insight around impact and collaboration with non-academic sector. I know that Paul and you mentioned your collaboration with industry and that general outcomes related to impact, and then we are happy to open the Q&A session, because I believe we have got a few questions which directly relates to your experience. So yeah, if it's possible, that would be great.
So we've had some positive outcomes in terms of publishing. So we published an article in a top journal, RCR Advances, and I go to those ICRS conferences, which are related to resources use and recycling, and very much on board with the kinds of ideas that we had in our research. I think we disseminated our research across in various ways, those were valuable moments in time, including through the KSG process, where we presented our work in London, which was a nice experience to have. And so I've also now working on further, because essentially this beginning starts a new stream in research in international trade. So I am a lot of things, including an economist, and in economics, they often, the traditional economists often don't want to talk about in my world, at least, depends on where you're coming from, but sustainability and circular economy, and so bringing these concepts together was considered, depending on the field that you're coming from, it seems like a radical thing to do, even though at the World Trade Organization website you could see they've been talking about sustainable development. It's not necessarily in the realm of certain economists' perspectives. And so this work that we've done starts a new stream in international trade by bringing circular economy in and showing that. And so in addition to the article that we published, I've also recently worked on an empirical article to provide support for the theory that we developed. So we developed theory, and now I have in the works, it's under review, but I've done an empirical work because I want to build this stream of circular economy international trade and make it kind of more mainstream into the international trade literature. So we're moving along, trying to evolve and have an impact on research out there in the broader sense. Okay.
So great. Great. So before we start with the Q&A session, let me just say thank you so much for sharing this very useful and valuable insight, and hope the audience found that helpful as well. So Sylvia, what kind of questions do you have for Paul and Deborah?
Yep, so the first one that has come up, it says, can the speakers please give an outline of their budget and how it was allocated?
Okay. Well, I think that we worked with, so it was Phil and I in Canada and Paul in the UK. So we thought about just really dividing up the funds as equally as possible, and based on also the number of us on each side. So, you know, we came to an mutual agreement on how the budget was going to be divided up. And we had, you know, the project management ideas behind the plan. So that also helped us think about how the money would be allocated. So having that project management plan supports the budget allocation, as well as the who's involved, right? And ensuring that fairness.
And I would just add how our respective universities also shape who, you know, how the money is used, because obviously there are costs associated with doing research within institutions, and that's all worked through in the actual budgets. And I mean, we had a finance team that was working through, you know, the costings for the actual project from our side, which is quite normal for all institutions. But in a sense, sometimes it's taken out of your hands in how it's allocated. But obviously, you know, we did kind of work out how it was going to work initially. But also, don't forget, your institutions will also be working with you on the budgeting.
Brilliant, thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Thank you. The next question is, how did you work with other collaborators and knowledge users when it came to knowledge mobilization? And the second part of the question is, how did they determine what knowledge products or outputs were most relevant or important?
Well, as a researcher, generally speaking, journal articles are, you know, the most important, and so that's why we worked in that direction, and so that's, you know, really, I think the short answer to the question. I had experience with certain conferences because I'm an involved researcher. And so it wasn't that hard for me to figure out how to direct this work. It wasn't going to go, and that's something to think about too, you know, which type of outlet is going to be interested in your work. I wasn't going to go to a top hardcore economics journal knowing that economists are not all that inviting of ideas around sustainability and circular economy, right? So I had to figure out, well, how is this, you know, and what audience is going to accept this, so that it on such a topic where I'm really pulling two fields together in many ways. And so I also understood that I would have to wait a little bit of time because we were, you know, early in terms of thinking about this topic. And very new in the world, as I was trying to explain. Whereas today people are starting to talk about international trade and circular economy and putting them together. This hadn't been discussed before. And, you know, when you're breaking new ground and you have silos, right, out there in the research world, and there's silos that are not necessarily going to accept that you're bringing in new ideas in. You have to think about also the timing of the publication. So I also waited a while, put some time in. I didn't try to publish it right away because I knew it could be very hard to get it into any journal just because there are no reviewers, right, who can review such a topic. And the circular economy has rolled out and become more popular within academia. But even today, given my recent work, empirical work, and recent reviews of very recent literature, I know that the discussion is that circular economy is still not really highly implemented yet. Europe is leading on it, but it's something that there's still a struggle to implement it. So you can imagine that I had to watch circular economy roll out more within the academic literature, right? And then adding a new idea, both from an economics point of view and a sustainability point of view. I think the sustainability researchers are more open to bringing in new ideas, and that's where I went and chose that kind of outlet rather than a hardcore economics journal. And then also, like I said, I put some time in before trying to publish the work because, you know, journals have to find people who can review the work. So there has to be, you know, an acceptance process, but there also have to be people involved who can review. And so I felt very happy that I was able to publish this work, given that it does break new ground.
Brilliant, thank you very much. I think we've got time for a couple more questions. So there's one here where they are interested in how the project describes included the interviews with stakeholders, organization and individuals. They're just asking if you can talk a little bit more about how these information gathering strategies have balanced in the past funded KM projects, just making also sure that it's staying within the purpose of the KSG. So maybe just around more about the interviews and the gathering of your information that you did, that you mentioned previously.
Well, I think having 3 main researchers on the project is tremendously helpful in terms of us knowing people and having contacts to draw upon, right? That all the previous experience that all 3 of us bring to the table in terms of our experiences, I think all of us are 3 people who are out there in terms of, you know, I go to lots of conferences, I go to lots of industry, like lots of events in Toronto and internationally to academic events, Paul obviously very high, and Phil as well. So having people on board who can bring you know, contacts to the table is helpful, because cold calling when people don't know you at all can be a challenge. So having some sort of experiences and having interactive with people previously is valuable. How would you answer that question, or how would you add, Paul?
I think it's drawing on the networks, isn't it? Kind of, you know, as we do a lot of work at Winchester with industry, and we do a lot with universities in London as well, City University, etc., or have done in the past. And so we've built over the years contacts with you know, organizations in the city which have links to many institutions in the private sector. So we draw on a lot of those kind of informal networks. In the first base, in just developing, well, who are we going to approach? Obviously, there are other, key institutions that you want to talk to. So, for example, the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, was heavily used in the academic literature as the kind of benchmark for the circular economy. Well, they're based in the Isle of Wight in Cowes, and I went down and met them and talked about some of their what was quite interesting was talking to different members of the MacArthur Foundation, because it's also a commercial organization as well, which I didn't fully realize. A lot of the sponsorships come from multinational corporations, which again is quite interesting, because that then opens other questions which weren't necessarily part of the remit of the research. But I think you're developing your knowledge as you're doing the research of which institutions or which bodies are going to be you want to talk to, and then I think it's well, you can call them, do the written approach, or send an email, or whatever works basically. But often it is the informal network. Somebody knows somebody within that institution who can actually then help you to speak to the team or people you actually want to have an interview with. Because what you don't want to do is just be speaking to the wrong type of people who aren't going to be able to give you any insight into how, from our point of view, how the circular economy was working in the context of, in an international context. So it'd be pointless just looking at a small business that doesn't have any international affiliations at all. So again, it's just using, I think, your judgment, drawing on your experience, but also being creative as well. I mean, something that I've recently done was a town hall talk in Berlin at Atelier Gardens, which is the main film and television studio. And they had a town hall event on the circular economy. And essentially it was looking how the circular economy can be used in budgeting scenes in films and television, because of the high cost of films and television. But if you think of something like wardrobe, which is obviously something which materials that aren't, are used in multiple productions, it's very similar to the reuse model in the circular economy. So it's really interesting how you can think sometimes, creatively and identify, institutions or sectors that you weren't necessarily in your sights, but you can find actually they're quite interesting places to go and talk to people and find out more about how, whatever it is that you're interested in is being used. And certainly for me, that was kind of eye-opening in the kind of the extent in which the circular economy is actually being used in film and television as a way of reducing, the budgets in, or managing budgets in, in the respective scenes in television and film.
Thank you so much.
And another place. Oh, do you want to do another question, or I was going to add, but
sorry, Deborah. I believe we need to wrap up because I'm just
Okay.
conscious of the time. Sylvia, I think is there anything you would like to add before we wrap up?
No, I was just going to hand back over to you after that.
Okay, great. Thank you. So I'm really sorry that we have some very limited time left. Again, thank you so much, Deborah and Paul, for your very, very insightful and useful thoughts and sharing those experiences with us. And then it's also quite interesting, referring back what Paul just outlined, how diverse that this can be. And in it, I think it's a very positive surprise to see that some institution which probably you never thought about to be somehow included is now included in a way. So that's really interesting to see. So thanks very much for taking the time, and we do appreciate that.
Well, it was a great experience, and I highly recommend it to all those who are applying. I think it's a very good process, and thank you for supporting us in our research. I know that all of us really appreciate all of your work on both sides in Canada and the UK. Thank you so much.
Great.
Yes, thank you.
you.
I echo that. Your support was fantastic. Yeah, on both sides of the pond. So
thank you very much. Thank you. Have a lovely day, and thanks.
Great. Thank you.
Okay, great. Then let's move on to our final part of today's webinar. So basically, we said we will summarize again the key points of today, and then doing the closing Mentimeter to make the comparison between our opening one and then handing over to our colleague Stephen to outline what you can expect from the final webinar, which is taking place in October. So I believe from my point of view, I think it's really important, which also relates to this one remaining open question about knowledge mobilization activities and how this connects to the synthesis report and to the 2-page evidence brief. And I would like to emphasize that the knowledge mobilization activities should be part of the synthesis report and should be part of evidence brief, and it's not a kind of addition. So it needs to be included. What else is important? I think it's important to re-emphasize that the proposed themes in question is just a guidance, and you are more than welcome to consider issues which is not listed but have a connection to the proposed theme on governance. I think an important takeaway is to consider what the requirements are in relation to Stream 2 with 2 applicants, one based in Canada and one based in the UK, and the split of budget. Don't know, Sebastian, whether you want to add anything from your side before we start with the closing Mentimeter?
Yeah, thanks, Marisha. I mean, just to say that if you do have any questions, we do have a dedicated mailbox for this opportunity, and colleagues at SSHRC also have a dedicated mailbox. So along with the presentation and the recording of this webinar, we'll also be sharing those details for you to get in touch if you read through things and have any questions for us on anything, what you've heard today, or what might be in the information on those landing pages. We'll also go away. I know there was a few unanswered questions or ones that may not have been answered exactly the way that they should have been. So we'll also add those in as well as a list of questions. I see Manisha's just shared it there in the chat too. I did mention earlier on that we've got a sort of networking form that you can fill in if you want to, if you're looking for potential partners on either side, and we will also circulate the link to that as well, along with everything else a few days after today's webinar, once we've had a chance to collate things.
Thank you. So do you want to start with the closing Mentimeter, Azeb?
Yeah, I can do. This shouldn't take too much time. I think there's about 3 or 4 questions. You might have been kicked off of this as I was messing around in the background a bit earlier, but if you want to go to menti.com and enter the code 9456145, we can just have a quick repeat of this this question. What is your level of knowledge on what a KSG is? We're essentially going to compare that to what was the answers at the start of the meeting, and it'll tell us essentially if we've done a good job. And then the other questions that follow are slightly more text-based as well. I'll just wait for those of you to answer. Again, menti.com and the code 9456145. It's at the top here of the slide if you need it. I'll wait for maybe a couple more responses, and then we'll move on to the next slide. Okay, so moving on. Did the webinar meet your expectations? Feel free to be brutally honest on this. This is all a learning opportunities for us. Okay, I'll give slightly more time to the next questions because they are more text-based. So, which webinar features or items did you like the most? And there is one after this for those that you would like to change or see different as well. And then that's the end of the questions here. Thanks for your comments so far. And this will certainly help in future presentations that we put together and other information webinars. Okay, thanks for your comments. And here's the flip side of that. Which features or items would you like to change, or what did you feel didn't necessarily work that well? Yes, networking opportunities was something that we thought about when we were planning this webinar. Couldn't quite figure out a way to make it work properly or have the intended outcomes, hence why we have that networking form. But it's certainly something that we're keen to do more of. Something we've learned from previous KSGs is that there is a benefit to us as funders trying to help people network to build those research collaborations, and it's something that we'll take forwards and trying to learn the best way to do. Yeah, budgets and
sorry, Zeb, just to add one additional comment in relation to networking. If you have got any specific ideas you would like to share with us, please feel free to use the email and share your thoughts and your ideas, because we still have some time. The call is closing on the 12th of December. We could potentially consider to include that. Thank you.
Yeah, and we'll make sure, if there are things here, for instance, on the budgets and so on, we can include more clear information in the information that we send around with the slides as well. Okay, I think in the interest of time, I'll stop there and hand over to Stephen, who's going to explain the next webinar that SSHRC are hosting. I will leave this open in the background, so if you want to continue to add comments, please feel free to do so. Stephen.
Thanks very much, Sebastian. So SSHRC will be hosting a webinar on October 10th at 4 p.m. So that's 11 a.m. Eastern time. So this webinar will focus on collaborations between Canadian and UK researchers, and depending on the interest, we may host some breakout rooms to foster some collaborations if indeed possible. We will, of course, go through the application form in depth, break down exactly how to fill out the application form, who's in charge, whether it be the Canadian or UK researchers in order to do so. We'll also look into the budget form, as both SSHRC and the UK researchers have to fill out their own budget form. So we'll go into details on that, as well as the merit review and the evaluation criteria of the competitive process. We'll also include some frequently asked questions throughout the presentation. So yeah, we hope that you'll be able to join us on October 10th, and I've included a link in the chat if you would like to sign up for that event. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Stephen. Just to sum up, the focus of the final webinar is on the process side around application and review and networking. So save the date, and I think it would be, again, hopefully a very useful webinar to prepare you. So on behalf of our colleagues, I just want to say thank you for joining us. And as I said, feel free to share any additional thoughts you might have and suggestions. We could potentially consider to incorporate that on the final webinar. So thanks again. Have a productive day, and yeah, and hopefully it prepares you well to submit your applications on the 12th of December 2024 for this competition. Thank you.